Born in Portuguese Angola on October 5th of 1945, a young Carlos Antonio Castro had a passion for poetry, and his love of written word evolved into a playful but intense interest in journalism. At just 15 years old, Carlos moved to the Angolan capital of Luanda to begin his career as a reporter, and his star gradually rose until he became one of the most high-profile TV personalities in the entire Portuguese-speaking world. Carlos worked in the media for 35 years, mostly covering lighthearted gossip and celebrity stories. In early 2011, Carlos's rich and storied life would come to a dark and violent and shocking the wider journalist community and breaking the hearts of tens of thousands of adoring fans. During his life, Carlos Castro broke many a big story on musicians, actors, and other celebrities. Perhaps his biggest story was his own. Back in 1990, Carlos was one of the first Portuguese-speaking celebrities to openly come out as gay, and was perhaps one of the first in the world to do so on live television. He later said that being free to quote revealed the feminine side of his personality was something that brought him a lot of joy. But given how overly masculine Latin culture can be, he also found it extremely difficult to. Thankfully, gay and lesbian acceptance rose phenomenally throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, and by 2011, the 65-year-old was quite publicly in a relationship with a 21-year-old male model, Renato Samora, who had been a contestant on the Portuguese modeling-themed reality show In Search of the Dream. But all was not well with the fledgling relationship, as we're about to discover. Just after Christmas of 2010, Carlos and Renato decided to fly to New York City to see some Broadway shows and spend New Year's Eve in Times Square. To some outsiders, the couple seemed very much in love, but close friends and newspaper editor Luis Perez would later state that there had been some friction between the two men towards the end of the trip, but nothing to suggest that anything horrible was about to happen. On Friday, January 7th, Carlos and Renato had planned to catch a musical during the early evening before meeting up with Peter as his ex-wife and daughter at the Intercontinental Hotel. The woman waited quite a while on the hotel's lobby, long after the couple were due to show, but instead of both men arriving, only Renato appeared in the lobby. According to the man, Renato approached them with a dazed look on his face, and when asked where Carlos was, he replied, "Carlos will never leave the hotel again." It was a chillingly cryptic thing to say, and as Renato apparently disappeared from Myuu, the two women rushed to inform hotel security. Just after 7 p.m. that night, hotel security entered Carlos' hotel room and found nothing short of a horror show. Carlos had been beaten to death, and in the period, someone had used a laptop computer and a wine bottle as the murder weapons. But perhaps even more horrifying was the fact that someone had castrated him using the corkscrew of a bottle opener. The same corkscrew had also been used to gouge out one of Castro's eyes, but a medical examiner declared that his death was caused by blunt impact injuries to the head and neck compressions, and then it wasn't possible to determine if he was mutilated before or after he died from his head injuries. Obviously, the NYPD was very focused on talking to the Renato Samora, but when they tracked him down, they discovered he was at the St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center after trying to slit his own wrist. After being taken into custody, he was given a psychiatric evaluation at Boulevard Hospital Center. But given that he was considered a person of interest, this was all done under the careful watch of law enforcement. Then, he was declared mentally sound enough to be questioned. Renato stunned the officers in attendance by actually confessing to Carlos's murder. He also tried to take his own life out of grief. He tried to offer himself to avoid having to pay for what he'd done. It would be easy to assume what had happened between Carlos and Renato was a lover's tiff, a passionate disagreement gone horribly wrong. But when asked why he'd killed his lover, Renato told the police that he'd murdered Carlos in a bid to, quote, get rid of his own homosexual demons. During the remainder of the police interview, Renato appeared to be acting extremely erratically, almost as if he was working up to make an insanity defense. After securing both men's cell phones, it became apparent that the couple had been arguing over Carlos, his seeming unwillingness to splash the cash on his much younger boyfriend. In light of that new evidence, police charged Renato with second-degree murder, and given that he'd already confessed, there was no trial, and said the case was handed over to the New York County District Attorney, who recommended that Renato receive the maximum sentence of 25 years to life. May-January of 2013, Renato Cia Brown was no longer Renato Zamora. He was simply Prisoner 13 at 0056 at the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. In accordance with his last will and testament, Carlos Castro's sister would later spread his ashes in the subway tunnel that run under Broadway. It seems particularly haunting that despite the fact that Carlos was tripped in New York was a dream come true for him, it was one that neither he nor Renato would ever return home from. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. When the event I'm about to share happened, I was 20 years old, and I'm sharing it because I know I'm not the only guy who has gone through it. I also know that as a guy, these types of experiences can leave one feeling confused, embarrassed, or worse. Now, my mother used to be a manager at a henhouse grocery store in the city where I was born and raised. When a job opening became available in the deli, she offered the position to me, so I took it. And I was working with 3 other people, one of which I became fast friends with. His name was Alvin, and he had moved to the Midwest from Louisiana. I forgot exactly what he said had happened, but the gist of it was that he had gotten into some trouble back home and his mom asked Alvin's brother if he could come and stay with him. When I met Alvin's older brother, I was excited to find out that he worked as a sheriff's deputy in the county I lived in. I had planned to become a police officer myself once I turned 21, so having Alvin's older brother as a sort of mentor made it seem all the more possible. One night, I heard the honk of a car horn in front of my home. Peeking out the window, I recognized the car to be Alvin's brother's unmarked sheriff's vehicle. It was only 1 minute from the grocery store and 5 minutes from his house, so it didn't seem all that out of place. But I was a bit confused as to why he stopped by so late. To be honest, I was kind of hoping he would invite me for a ride-along, which is where a civilian rides shotgun with an on-duty police officer to learn more about what law enforcement does. When I got to the car, he told me to hop in, so I was up. I asked Alvin went to some rave out in the country somewhere, and I'm worried about him, so I want to go get him, he answered. I just wanted to swing by and ask if he wanted to ride along and help me search for the location. Yeah, sure. I said it was so long. I can't really remember how long we drove around, but where my mother and I lived was already on the edge of the city, so getting to the rural parts wouldn't have taken that long. However, he did drive a way out and the darkness swallowed everything that was illuminated by the car's headlights. I had attended many raves in my teens, so I do remember finding it odd that a rave would be held in the rural area we were in. Then at some point, Alvin's brother said, "You know I love you, right?" Now, I was far from an innocent kid growing up, so I was immediately suspicious of this off-the-wall question, whatever it was. "Yeah, bro, you're a good friend," I answered, emphasizing the words bro and friend. "Nah, you don't get it," he replied, in a way that sounded frustrated. "I'm in love with you." He continued emphasizing the words in love. This isn't good. A voice screamed in my head. I sort of glanced at his service weapon on his head pod to the corner of my eye and thought, this is really bad. Then I noticed the car began to slow down, and I looked over at Alvin's brother, who was staring at me, the car now moving at a crawl. "Look," he began, "I'll take care of you. I got a lot of money, so I can buy you a car or house, whatever you want. Just let me have you." This time, the voice in my head wouldn't stop screaming. My heart was pounding, and sweat began to slowly drip down my face. I'm not like that, bro," I tried to explain. "You know, I have a permanent girlfriend. I'm not like that." Now the car wasn't moving, and though it was inky dark around us, light from the car's instrument panel only glowed a little, and I was able to see the scowl on his face. "Well, it seems the rave may have already shut down," he said after what seemed like an hour of sitting in the middle of a dark rural road in awkward silence. He then pulled a U-turn and began heading back in the direction we had just come. And thank God. I finally arrived home after maybe a 45-minute drive of silence and awkwardness. As we pulled up in front of my house, I went to open the door and get out, but felt his hand grab my forearm. "If you tell anyone about this, just remember." He trailed off as if thinking twice about what he was about to say. And then he let my arm go, and I got out of his car. I shut the door and never turned to look back. I just wanted to get inside my house as fast as I could and lock the door. I never saw or heard from Alvin's brother again after that, and I'm glad. This happened nearly a decade ago. At the time of the story, I was 15, male, 5'5", and 132 pounds. I was a wrestler, so I always knew my exact weight and kept myself extremely lean, but still had a fairly muscular build. I lived in a fairly small town of about 50 to 60,000 people, and in my off-season, I did whatever I could do to become somewhat active than outside. I had a friend, we'll call him Blaze, who was really into disc golf and always asked me to come play with him and smoke a doobie while we were in the most secluded parts of the course. He was a couple of years older than me, but no bigger than I was, just not so great of an influence for me at the time. This small town only had 2 disc golf courses, one at a very public park near middle school, or one at the edge of town and an older park that was much bigger. Obviously, we weren't smoking for everyone to see. Little did I know, on that Thursday afternoon, that this park happened to be my town's hotspot for people meeting and hooking up in the parking lot. I live in the Midwest in the US, so there weren't a lot of, young, stylish, pretty guys. It's mostly guys aged 30 and 50, pretty big and bulky and country looking. So we finished the course in the joint, walked out of the woods anything but sober. We typically either just chilled in the grass or played catch after we finished up, until my buddy was more normal and ready to drive back. We noticed that there were way more cars in the parking lot that we got there, and a lot of older guys sitting on trunks of their cars or on tailgates loosely grouped together. This very large hairy man in a tank top and his tall thin friend dressed like a biker gang member started to do the wolf whistle toward me and my friend. I got pretty uncomfortable, not because a man whistled at me, but because we had to walk in their direction and I could feel the eyes have way more guys on me than I wanted. For a testosterone-filled weight room junkie teenager, I did not feel very safe here knowing that there were at least 30 guys in this group, and I can see in my peripheral that a very large portion were eyeing us closely as we walked toward the parking lot. I'll make it clear that I'm not a fighter, and I would never intend to hurt anyone aside from self-defense. But I was definitely confident in myself to hold someone off. Us too. We're just so outnumbered and not in a sober state of mind, so anxiety made things much worse. A couple of them said some gross catcall things, more whistles, and then woo-woo noises that rednecks like to make when they're excited about something, or instigating similar to woo, but if Eric Cartman screeched it. I think they had the idea that we were some people that met online and we were coming to meet up, being, "Hi." I didn't care what was going on. I just wanted to be safe and not the center of attention. When we got closer, the big hairy man who did the first wolf whistle said something like, "You think you can handle this?" I just mumbled, "No thanks," and tried to keep walking. He yelled back, "Who was that boy?" To which I just clearly, "No thanks." Not into it. He seemed offended and angry. Said, "Not into what?" I said I was sorry, I'm not gay. And he seemed to be offended by that word. Again, asked me to repeat myself in a very aggressive tone. So I corrected myself and said, "I'm just not into guys." Things escalated from here very quickly. The man stepped forward from leaning against a truck and grabbed my wrist. He said, "Well, we can fix that real quick." Don't get excited. I didn't do some cool fight move to attack him. Just a simple wrist roll and using that momentum, a quick push of the elbow to turn him around so that he would have his back to me and I could get by without him anymore. He responds, touches me like that again, and we'll get the both of you. Another guy made his way over to Blaze, who was much less common shrill type of stoner than I was. I can only describe what he did as one of those kicks or sidesteps off of a wall, but to that guy's chest and abdomen. He started to run and yell F off as loud as possible. Very quickly, bunches of guys began to stand up from their seats on the outside of their cars and motion our direction. I started booking it for the car too, and the Mr. Skinny biker type man was running right after us. Thank God it was just him running and not multiple chasing us, or the story might be different. I was faster than Blaze, so I got ahead of him and pictured us running across the parking lot to his truck that was facing us backing into the stall. I got around to the passenger side quickly, with Blaze still about 100 feet from the truck. He tried to cut to the rights and make it to the driver's side of this little stint, but the skinny guy cut him off and sent him to the left passenger side. I ran around the back of the truck as fast as I could to the driver door, and Blaze slid his key around the roof towards me. I hopped in, well aware that I did not want to be driving right now in this state of mind, much less in such a crazy situation, and even more or less someone else's vehicle. Still, without thinking, I started that skirt out of the parking lot while Skinny banged on the bed of the truck chasing. But that wasn't the end. A truck and a car on the way right behind me. Skinny jumped into the car that was in the back, and the chase began. Terrified and still high. I cut through the grass in the park to get to the main road more quickly, thinking I would lose them that way. These guys raced over the speed bumps and around the bends in the park road right up to the main road, and they were driving so fast I would have gotten T-boned if I didn't smash the pedal to the floor at the same time. I'm so stressed I started silently crying while driving. Think of how horrible the possibility could be contact, whereas know that when your eyes are dry from the smoke, then they rapidly get moist. Contacts tend to drift to bits until they find their place again. This is definitely not ideal for someone with awful vision driving twice the speed limit down the road in the middle of town. So I started turning down residential streets and weaving in and out, being tapped on the shoulder by Blaze to keep my speed up because the two were still on the rear bumper. I even made some risky U-turns that they followed right along. This chase lasted over 10 minutes of me frantically driving through main streets, residential back alleys, and everything I could try to get away. I was so scared. The best case scenario ended up not getting pulled over, and myself obtaining a permanent record by DUI by the ripe age of 15. Luckily, a stroke of luck and a surprisingly quick reflex came to my aid. Blaze yelled "cop" and pointed to a parking lot to our left, where there were police cruisers probably just waiting to catch someone speeding or running red lights. On the semi-busy road we ended up on, I whipped into the parking lot and parked a couple of stalls down from the cop. The truck prepared to turn, but stopped in the middle of the road. So quickly, once he realized what was going on, that the car followed him, had to swerve and pop a curve, catching the officer's attention. He backed out, and the two vehicles split different ways and were out of sight before he got out of the parking lot. Never went back to that park any time other than the mornings after that. So thankfully, that nothing bad came out of the incident, and we made it out completely unscathed. No idea what they would have done, but people were engaging teenagers in a car chase could not have had good intentions in mind. It was my first time in my life being harassed like that too. You would think being in a car chase might be fun or exciting, but I just felt so powerless and like I had no control. Like nothing I could do would both get these guys away from us and simultaneously not get me arrested.